So once again, happy All Saints to you. This is that Sunday. It's the Sunday where you get to hear me telling you all, guess what? You are all saints. Because this is that day. It's the day when the Pilgrim Church, which is all of us who are still on our earthly Christian journey, and then all of the church at rest, which means every Christian in every time and in every place. This is the day when we celebrate our shared fellowship and our shared ministry in Christ. And of course, because it's the church, we have to have a fancy name for it. We call this the communion of saints. We get to celebrate together and also remember something important. Thank you for that wonderful version of I Sing a Song of the Saints of God. All those great heroic saints that give us examples in the struggles of our own Christian pilgrimages. And you see, I have a feeling sometimes that's where we don't always manage to see ourselves as saints. Because those people, the heroes, right? They can make sainthood seem somewhat, unobtainable. Really, though, I think this whole saint thing comes down to a simple question, which is, what does God want for us, and how do we live a good life? Yet, the answers to that question can be sometimes just as confusing to sort out as all of the health nutrition information that we get. I have a hard time with that one. I mean, remember the things they used to tell us were good for us, and they're now not so good for us, like margarine, for example. And I kind of imagine that might be some of what this scribe that we meet in our gospel today was struggling with as he approached Jesus. Now, I feel like I've mentioned this before, but in Jewish tradition, there are said to be 613 commandments. That's a lot. I know. Shake your head. It's a lot to follow. It covers everything from the basics, like don't make graven images of God, to all of the very sundry ways that you can be careful not to mix the milk of a beast with its meat. So, they end up with 613, and lots of commentaries help so you can make sure that you've got them all down. I mean, it can sort of feel like, as hard it is to try, and not eat foods with bad cholesterol while remembering which ones have good cholesterol. It's tough. Think about our 10 commandments that we walk through life with. I know I find some of them aren't so difficult. I mean, I can wake up most days and be, managed not to steal, tick, didn't murder anyone, hey, I'm doing great. But there are definitely ones that are a little bit harder. I mean, for me, not coveting, that's kind of a kicker. I mean, there's lots to covet out there. The temptations are everywhere. But with 613 rules for godly living, it gets harder and harder. And you know what? I think that's another thing about rules. Because with rules, we have to figure out what to do with the people who break them. When I was in seminary, I had a field education placement in a battered women's shelter. And I had chosen this placement because I wanted to help women and children who had been trapped by poverty and violence to escape and be free to make new lives. Well, one of the things that I discovered was that in order for this shelter to house 5 or 6 families together and to keep the location a secret, which was absolutely essential to everybody's safety there, it meant that there had to be a lot of rules. And they all had to be fairly and effectively enforced. Now, I have to say, I squirmed every time I had to face a woman who had just recently gotten up the courage to leave her abusive partner and tell her that if she couldn't put her dishes away or be in by curfew, we would have to ask her to leave. Now, there were people there who were really good at this. They had been there a while, and they had worked out why they were doing what they were doing and how to do it in a way that felt like it worked. But I have to say, I'm not sure I ever got past the discomfort. The rules, I could see they were essential for the functioning of that whole community of women and children and for the safety of each of its members. But it wasn't easy. So Hebrew society in Jesus' time worked much in the same way. That list of 613 rules, they were guidelines for how the community could keep itself in right relationship with each other and with God. Now, Judaism in Jesus' day was just as diverse as Judaism today. So, of course, there were many varied opinions about how strictly all of those 613 rules need to be kept and exactly how. Lots of conversation. You can find some of that in Jewish writings and tradition. But we also know from our Gospels that there were definitely some who were worried that the rule breakers placed everything in jeopardy with God and with each other. So I find myself wondering if this scribe that we meet today is someone who's listened to some of those arguments and thought, I'm a little uncomfortable with this. I would like to find a less rigorous approach. And maybe he's kind of hung around in the background and he's watched Jesus and he's thought, this is clearly a godly person. And yet I see him sometimes being a little bit cavalier with some of those rules, like healing on the Sabbath or hanging out with tax collectors, because he believes that there's an overarching good that comes from God that's in play in the situation. I think this might be why the scribe finally got up the courage to ask the question that he asked today. So, what about the answer that Jesus gives? Do you think that the scribe got what he was looking for? First of all, Jesus gives what you could call the textbook answer. He says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might." Now that's the foundational creedal statement of the Jewish faith, and it's prayed daily in Jewish religious life. Jesus is agreeing. He's saying that keeping God as the only center of your life and loving and serving God with everything that you have and everything you are, that is how we are called to live, plain and simple. Now, for me, today, when I hear a request like that from Jesus, my initial inclination is that I need to get my internal house in order. I need to meditate more and do my deep breathing so that I can walk through life feeling connected to God and God's presence with me wherever I go and whatever I do. And that is a great starting point. But I think Jesus is suggesting that we shouldn't stop there. Every time I'm thinking about my modern mindset and possibly how I'm putting that on things that are in the Bible, I love to thumb through my social science commentary, because it likes to remind me that people in Jesus' time saw love and hate differently than we do today. For them, love and hate were outward behaviors, not inward and internal states. For them, loving someone meant having an affiliation to them, and it was the kind of affiliation that comes with mutual obligations, and that hate was really just someone with whom you didn't have that kind of attachment or those sorts of obligations. In other words, when you love a person, you treat them like their family, part of your village, worthy of your time and your care. So, how do we love God today? And what are our mutual obligations? Well, this is an election week, you might have noticed. And we, I think, are all aware that that very question, how do you love God and what are our mutual obligations, is a subject of just as much debate and diversity of opinions as it might have been in Jesus' time. But Jesus gives us some help because he pulls out another one of those 613 statutes that'll help us sift through all of the noise. Because he tells us all, love your neighbors as yourself. Now, I find this kind of a relief. That to love, in this case, is an action, not a feeling. Love your neighbors as yourself. Because it's not about whether you like someone. It's more about following through on the kinds of things that we promise in our baptismal covenant. Things like seeking and serving Christ in all persons, or striving for justice and peace among all people, and respecting the dignity of every human being. I think that's more like what Jesus means in terms of loving our neighbors. Things that are actions. You don't have to like everyone. We just have to treat every person as if they are a child of God. Right? Every person is a child of God. But, hold on. Because that scribe, he wanted to know the one most important commandment, and Jesus gives him two. Just, I don't know, is that kind of cheating? He didn't really read the instructions, right? So why? Why did Jesus give us two? It's not, I don't think it's that Jesus can't decide. Jesus is kind of clear. He says there is no other commandment greater than these. No other commandment greater than these two. It is as if Jesus is saying that the two are really just one, and that when we strive to act with compassion towards all people, we are loving God. And when we ignore the needs of the poor and the oppressed, we in fact fail at loving God. In fact, this might be how we love God, by caring for all people and not just our own people. Well, the scribe can see the sense in what Jesus is saying, and he agrees. Yet Jesus tells him, not, oh, you've got it, hooray, you pass. He says, you're close. You are close to the kingdom. But you know what? You're not there yet. It's like Jesus is saying to him, well, yeah, now that you understand it, what are you going to do about it? I think the first Christians really understood this piece. I read recently that the early Christians had a well-known and well-deserved reputation for their social generosity, and that they were building all kinds of bridges of community out into all the places that they live. I mean, the early Christian communities, we know, they were in all these cities spread throughout the ancient Near East, and yet they're building walls of community instead of or bridges of community instead of walls of separation, and they're doing all the good that they can do. Tertullian puts it like this: our active love has become our distinctive sign. Our active love is our sign. This is what it means to be a Christian. So, makes you wonder, how did Christianity get to the point today where lots of people look at Christianity and its actions and say, you know what, I love God, but I'm not so sure about this religion thing. And more importantly, what are we going to do about that? Because I think that's the point that Jesus is making today, that we need to get on with it and do something. Make our love of God and love of neighbor into actions. Anything really that we do that can pull God out of the margins and into the center of our lives by serving the poor, the lonely, the sick, and the oppressed of the world, that extension of our compassion, it does all of that. We just need to figure out how and then keep on doing more and more. Let it fill our lives. Because you know what, if you start doing that, it will very quickly start to fill your whole heart, your whole soul, your whole mind, and lots and lots of strength. As I think the Pips Pantry people can tell you from husking all of those crazy vegetables and the tables around each week. And you know what I think? Jesus' point is that there are lots of possibilities. I mean, just two good ones for this season. What if we go to the polls on Tuesday? Anyone still going to go to the polls, or is everybody a voter? I love to go to the polls. It's my thing. Anyway, what if we went, or have already gone, and vote for candidates that support policies that seek to end extreme suffering and poverty? That would be a new way to evaluate them, but it's one way to do this. Alternatively, what if we spend less of the coming weeks? We know what season we're heading into. Halloween ended, so what? It's time to get ready for Christmas.
Thanksgiving.
See, there you go. There you go. That's the better approach. But if you walk into the stores, you would think it was the other way around.
Oh, yeah.
So what if, terrible. I know, I agree. So what if we spent the coming weeks dedicating less time to shopping and preparation and more time to family, church, and service to the poor around us and the people in need? Those are just a couple of ideas, because I know we could come up with so many more. So that question, what's God want from us, and how do we live a good life? In other words, how can we be those saints that we have all been declared to be? I think the opportunities abound. The most important thing is don't get overwhelmed. Don't be like that scribe who looks at the list of 613 commandments and think, oh, how am I ever going to do that? I need it to be simplified. I think Jesus today is really saying, I'm not here to tell you exactly what to do. I'm just going to give you the principles. Love God, love your neighbor as yourself. Keep serving and building the kingdom, one outward reaching act of love and compassion at a time. And then you know what? You'll really be able to sing that song. The saints of God are just folks like me and you, and we mean to be one